But on the other hand, James Bond did have a licence to kill and a thirst to employ it, whereas Flashman is a cowering impostor who prefers whoring and bullying to any risking of his skin on the thin red line. Thus, every novel must begin with a mise-en-scène that shows not just history as a chapter of screw-ups and screwings, but also Flashman's own participation as an unlucky accident. The anti-hero doesn't begin by calling coolly on M to be briefed on his latest lethal assignment. He begins by running away in the wrong direction. So to the drama of Bond, Fraser brilliantly adds the absurdity of Bertie Wooster. When Fraser first ushered his Homeric duffer onto the stage, P.G. Wodehouse was tempted into a rare comment saying, "If ever there was a time when I felt that watcher of the skies when a new planet stuff, it was when I read the first Flashman." Well, just as Wodehouse could have quoted the whole of that Keats poem with ease, one imagines that Flashman, or his creator, knows better in the 12th and latest novel, Flashman on the March, when he remarks that the British government is caught between Scylla and t'other thing. This is Wooster to the life, half remembering something from the schoolroom until corrected by Jeeves. As Bertie ruefully phrases it, never learning from his mistakes, it is just when you're stepping high and confident that fate waits behind the door with a stuffed eelskin. And here goes Old Flashy. My spirits were rising as we set off down the bank. The birds were carolling, there was a perfumed breeze blowing from the water. We were within a few miles of journey's end. I was absolutely humming Drink, Puppy, Drink. The larks and snails were no doubt on their respective wings and thorns. God was in his heaven, and on the verge of the jungle, not 20 yards away, a white-robed, helmeted lancer was sitting his horse, watching us. Or, as Bertie inquires in the Code of the Woosters, "But the larks, Jeeves, the snails, I'm pretty sure larks and snails entered into it." "I'm coming to the larks and snails, sir. The larks on the wing, the snails on the thorn." "Now you're talking. And the tabline? God's in his heaven, all's right with the world." That's it in a nutshell. I couldn't have put it better myself. Instead of Aunt Agatha, Fraser has placed a sinister and armed horseman at the terminus of his idyll. But then Raymond Chandler, an old schoolmate of Woodhouse's at Dulwich College, made it a maxim that when action was flagging, you could always have a man entering the room carrying a gun. To say that Fraser can so easily juggle Conan Doyle and Holmes, Fleming and Bond, Wodehouse and Wooster, and Chandler and Marlowe is, I hope, to offer reasonably high praise. But just to pile on the admiration for a bit, I know some eminent historians who have pored over Fraser's footnotes and appreciated details about, say, the charge of the Light Brigade that are known to few. The battle scene at Balaclava is meticulously done, and if his own mad charge is started by Flashman himself, who panics his horse by farting so loudly with sheer hangover and pure fear, why then it's hardly less of a fiasco and a shambles than the real thing turned out to be. I'm not looking for faults after all this drooling on my part, but there is one problem that needs to be faced squarely. In the earlier stories, Flashman is a sadist and a brute, as well as a rascally coward and goof-off. He takes positive, gleeful pleasure in the misfortunes of others, especially if he can turn those misfortunes to his own account. In the very first book, he tells us within months of joining his first regiment, "Myself, I liked a good flogging, and used to have bets with Bryant, my particular crony, on whether the man would cry out before the 10th stroke, or when he would faint. It was better sport than most, anyway." Some volumes later in Flash for Freedom, he's on the Mississippi and running away with the beautiful slave girl Cassie, who has been his bedmate and his companion in adversity. The brutal slave catchers corner them, and she is quivering like a hunted beast. Our hearts are in our mouths as he ponders what to do. "Cassie," I snapped, "can you use a gun?" She nodded. "Take this then," says I. "Cover them, and if one of them stirs a finger, shoot the swine in the stomach. There, catch hold. Good girl, good girl. I'll be back in an instant." "What is it?" Her eyes were wild. "Where are you?" "Don't ask questions, trust me." And with that, I slipped out of the door, pulled it to, and was off like a stung whippet. I'd make a quarter of a mile, maybe more, before she would twig, or they overpowered her. This gave new significance to the old phrase self-preservation. All you needed in order to anticipate old Flash's moves was to guess at the lowest possible motive. And then, unaccountably, our hero started to go soft. In Flashman and the Dragon, he is the captive of the sinuous Chinese courtesan Ye Ho Nala. When two of her eunuchs caught some crows and released them with firecrackers tied to their legs so that the birds were blown to bits in mid-air, Ye Ho Nala had the culprits' backsides cut to bloody pulp with bamboo whips, watching the infliction of the full 100 strokes with smiling enjoyment. You may say they deserved a drubbing, but you didn't see it. The earlier Flashman would A. not have thought the cruel eunuchs deserved a drubbing for their ingenuity, and B. not given a damn about their punishment. He would have relished both scenes. Deplorable signs of weakness were already evident in Flashman's Lady, where he burned himself with a white woman while trying to escape the horrifying soldiers of Queen Rana Valona. On that occasion, the inconvenient lady was also his wife, so conceivably an exception can be made. But by the time of Flashman and the Tiger, the plain fact had to be faced. The old boy had gone positively mushy with emotion and was prepared to risk his own skin, mark you, to save his granddaughter's honour. There was some muttering in the ranks of the fan base. One blushed to see the pitiful wreck of what once had been such an ignoble man. It is therefore a real pleasure to be able to record a corking return to form in the latest book. Flashman has been chivied all over Abyssinia and saved repeatedly by the exquisite Uliba, an African princess who has acted as his guide, protector and lover. There comes the moment, however, when their canoe has been swamped. The deadly waterfall is just ahead. Flashman has contrived to catch hold of an overhanging bough, and she has managed to seize one of his legs. There was only one thing to be done, so I did it, drawing up my free leg and driving my foot down with all my force at Uliba's face, staring up at me open-mouthed, half-submerged as she clung to my other knee. I missed, but caught her full on the shoulder, jarring her grip free, and away she went, canoe and all, the gunwale rasping against my legs as it was whirled downstream. One glimpse I had of the white water foaming over those long, beautiful legs, and then she was gone. Now, that, you will have to admit, is a damn sight more like it. Yes, sighs Fraser, a lot of readers thought he was going soft, or even getting braver. In fact, he can only display the courage of a cornered rat. And my daughter Caro, she's also a novelist, told me how delighted she was that this time he definitely turned nasty again. Historians and critics will never stop arguing about the worthwhileness of it all. That amazing conquest and settlement of the known globe by the aristocrats and peasants of a rain-sodden archipelago in the North Sea. Fraser makes Flashman face it in all its squalor and grandeur. The British-owned slave ships and the British vessels that put down the slave trade, the destruction of dens of tyranny in India and Abyssinia, and the hideous vandalizing of the Summer Palace in Peking, the serf armies and pirate navies that needed crushing, and the magnificent peoples, Zulus, Sikhs, Afghans, who the British had finally to admit were unconquerable. The empire on which the sun never set was also the empire on which the gore never dried. Only a few decades ago, when the Flashman papers were first unwrapped from their oilskin, all this seemed to have vanished like blood off a bayonet. But now British and American soldiers are back in Afghanistan and Mesopotamia, and George MacDonald Fraser, who is known as a curmudgeonly Tory war veteran and staunch hater of Tony Blair, is not best pleased. Tony Blair, he snorts down the phone, is not just the worst Prime Minister we've ever had, but by far the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. It makes my blood boil to think of the British soldiers who died for that little liar. Even so, in Flashman on the March, he ends his footnotes on the Abyssinian campaign ambiguously by noting that, although the British overthrew a crazed despot and then withdrew, if Britain had stayed, revisionist historians would certainly have condemned it as another act of selfish imperialism. This is the morally fraught terrain between the first sound of the bugle and the news of triumph or disgrace, which it takes a serious man to cover, whether saddled on a mettlesome charger or flourishing only a pen. And since history is often recounted by the victors, why not have it related for once by one who is something worse than a loser? Imagine if King Hal had kept Falstaff on hand as his bosom chum until the eve of Agincourt. and you have a sense of Flash's imperishable achievement.